Today, I'm going to be making an EDH deck tech around Jodah the Unifier. Jodah the Unifier is a 5/5 legendary human wizard for Wooburg and has legendary creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the number of legendary creatures you control. And whenever you cast a legendary spell from your hand, you can exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a legendary non-land card with lesser mana value. And you may cast that card without paying its mana cost and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Jodah is probably the poster child now for legendary tribal, and we're going to take advantage of that by running a bunch of legendary creatures that give all of our creatures evasion effects so we can take advantage of his first ability. Because we're casting so many legends, they'll cascade into each other thanks to his second ability. When it comes to ramp, we're going to be running a pretty standard package with Soul Ring and Arcane Signet being the go-to classic. We're also be running Farseek, Nature's Lore, and Zakura Triabelder. Great 2-mana ways for us to ramp and fix our colors. Birds of Paradise and Bloom Tenderer are great mana dorks that fix our colors, and Bloom Tenderer can generate a ton of mana, tapping for 5 if we have somebody like Jodah out. We're also be running Chromatic Lantern and Try to the Illusionist Grove. Not only do they let us ramp, but it also helps to fix our colors, which is very important in a 5-color deck. We're also be running Bard class. This is super great for buffing up our legendary creatures, but also has the added advantage of reducing their mana cost by Gruul. So it's not always ramp, but it does give us some extra legendary tribal synergy bonuses. And then finally, we're also running Isika, God of the Tree. We can also play her for her backside, but she does have the added advantage of allowing all of our legendary creatures to tap for mana, essentially becoming a legendary Cryptolithrite. When it comes to card draw for this deck, we're going to take a lot of advantage of the fact that there's a lot of card draw stapled to legendary creatures. To start off with, we're going to be running Reki, the History of Kamigawa, and Jorah, Weatherlight Captain, which both draw us a card whenever we cast a legendary spell. And Jorah gives us the added bonus of also letting us draw cards off of our artifacts, which there are a handful of in this deck. We're also going to be running Guardian Project and Chulane, Teller of Tales. Both of these draw us a card whenever we cast a creature spell, and Chulane has the added advantage of letting us put a land onto the battlefield. Since we're running a ton of legendary creatures, these are going to trigger a ton of times. Vanguard the Diplomat is an awesome card draw effect that makes it so we draw cards whenever our opponents cast too many spells or try to attack us. Savala, Explorer Return, draws us and our opponent's cards, so it gives us a little bit of political favor, and we can actually generate some mana off of her as well. Yambi, the Esteemed Speaker, allows us to return a creature to our hand just in case we need to protect it for whatever reason, and she also lets us discard our legendary cards and lets us draw cards off of her too. In addition, because we're a 5-color deck, there's going to be a lot of land ramp and a lot of land fixing, so we're going to have lands enter the battlefield a lot. So Tassiova, Benthic Druid is going to be great because we can turn those lands into card draw. And we're also going to be running Dihada, Binder of Wills. This is a super great way for us to buff our legendaries when they're on the battlefield, but can also draw us up to 4 with her -3 ability. We're also running a few generic draw effects, with Painful Truce being probably one of our best draw effects in a 5-color deck, essentially being a 3-mana draw 3. Seagate Restoration is super great because it also doubles as a land, and we're also running the classic combo of Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study. Let's get to the exciting part, the legendary creatures that we're going to be running in this deck. To start off with, we're going to have a handful of smaller legendary creatures. Rogue Rack is awesome because it's a 0-mana legend, and once we have it out with a bunch of creatures in Jodah, it's essentially a free First Strike, Menace, Trampler, which are all very strong abilities, especially in an attacking deck like this. Yoshimaru, the Ever Faithful, is super strong in this deck just because we're going to be having a lot of legendary permanents enter the battlefield, and with Jodah's buff, that can probably turn into a very large creature for just 1 mana. Fibblethip the Lost is a super fun card in here because, of course, classic character Fibblethip, but also we can have it enter the battlefield off of Jodah's Cascade trigger, so we can get that 2-mana draw effect, but also it's just a cheap legend that comes down early. We're also be running Minx, the Beloved Ranger, because it enters the battlefield with a legendary 1-wood hamster creature token. So when it enters the battlefield, we're getting 2 legends for the price of 1, which is great because that's essentially a +3/+3 with Jodah out on the battlefield. To expand on this more, we're also be running a lot of legends that support a go wide strategy. Arvar the Curse is a classic legendary tribal effect, giving all of our legendary creatures an additional +2/+2, and with Jodah on the battlefield, it's essentially a +3/+3. We're going to be running Sirach Dragonclaw, Kamal Heart of Krosa, Nylea God of the Hunt, and Kenrith the Returned King. All these have the great effect of making it so our creatures get trample. Kenrith being great because we can use him for a bunch of different things if we want to be political or reanimate our creatures, or just draw our cards if we have a bunch of leftover mana. Sirach is great because it prevents our creature spells from getting countered. Kamal Heart of Krosa is great because we can also boost our creatures even more when they go to trample, and Nylea gives us a great way to dump our mana. Samut, Voice of Dissent, and Maelstrom Wanderer give our creatures haste and have the added effect of a double cascade trigger and allowing us to untap our creatures. And Samut is just a very strong attacker as well. The Whip of Erebos is great because it gives all of our legendary creatures lifelink, and because it's a legendary permanent, it's going to trigger off of a bunch of different things. Additionally, it lets us reanimate our creatures for one turn as a sorcery, so it can be super great if we want to get one of our legendaries out of our yard in a pinch. Shanid the Sleeper Scrounge is great because it gives our legendary creatures menace, and whenever we play a legendary land or cast a legendary spell, we draw a card, so it gives us some extra card draw advantage. And then finally, we also have Jetmir Nexus of Revels. Jetmir is great because it gives our creatures a ton of bonus power, and also has the potential to give them Vigilance, Trample, and Double Strike, which is super strong in this deck. Some other legends we're going to be running are more utility based. We're going to be running Kethis the Hidden Hand, Kardor the Ghost Chieftain, and Muldrotha the Gravetide. All of these allow us to get legendary permanents out of our graveyard onto the battlefield, and can really help us stabilize in case of a board wipe. We're also going to be running Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. A lot of these legendary creatures are super powerful, so being able to get a second copy of them is super great. We're going to be running Shalai Voice of Pliny to give all of our creatures hexproof, and we're going to be running Wrath the Ship's Mage to give our legendary spells Flash. We're also be running God Eternal Oketra. This is super great in this deck because she has double strike, so she's a very strong attacker, but also whenever we cast a spell, we get a 4/4 zombie. Finally, we're also be running Blackblade Reforged. This is a great equipment, giving our creatures +1/+1 for each lane we control, which hopefully we're going to have a lot of, and because we're running almost all legendary creatures in this deck, it's going to be a lot easier for us to equip it because it's only 3 instead of the usual 7. And of course, it is also a legendary artifact, so it's going to help trigger some of our other legendary synergies. For removal in this deck, we're going to be running a combination of traditional removal and legendary removal. For our standard removal, we're going to be running 3 counter spells just because we have access to blue. We're of course going to run a handful of counter spells. We're going to be running the classic Arcane Denial, Counterspell, and Dovin's Veto, all super strong spells. We're also going to be running Beast Within and Assassin's Trophy, 2 super great removal spells that can hit any permanent. When it comes to our legendary removal, it's going to be a little bit more awkward, but it's going to be a lot more fun in this deck. We're going to be running Ashiok Dream Renderer. This is super great because it prevents our opponents from searching their libraries, canceling out a lot of green ramp. We're going to be running Beseju Who Endures, a super great land that doubles as removal. We're going to be running Karn's Temporal Sundering, a legendary sorcery that bounces a permanent but also lets us take an extra turn. And then one of my favorites has got to be Zakama Primal Calamity. While it's 9 mana, it does have the ability to destroy any artifact or enchantment, but it's also going to be super great for triggering Jodah's Cascade ability. We're also going to be running the classic legend Nicol Bolas Dragon God, which allows us to draw cards but also blow up creatures and planeswalkers our opponents control. It's also just a super cool planeswalker to have on the battlefield. We'll also be running the Menace of Standard himself, Oko Thief of Crowns. Its +1 is essentially a Beast Within, and it's always kind of fun to have an Oko on the battlefield given that he's banned in basically everything else. When it comes to board wipes, we're going to be running Cleansing Nova and Austere Command, super great modal board wipes that can let us choose what we want to keep on the battlefield. And of course, this is a legendary tribal deck, so we have to run Urza's Ruinous Blast since it exiles all land permanents that aren't legendary. And finally, before we get to the mana base for this deck, we're going to round it out with Wild Magic Sorcerer. This card is super good because it gives the first card we cast from exile each turn Cascade. This is really strong with Jodah's second ability since it doesn't technically count as a Cascade trigger. We can essentially Cascade our legends twice, which is super strong. When it comes to the mana base in this deck, we're going to be running 2 additional modal double face cards that I didn't mention before with Malakir Rebirth and Balagid Recovery. Super great utility pieces that can protect our legends or just get one of them back from the graveyard. We're going to be running the 2 legendary lands, Yavimaya Cradle of Growth and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. Super great legendary lands that also help to fix our mana. We're going to be running a suite of Triomes, Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, a good number of fetch lands, the World Tree, Mana Confluence, Path of Ancestry, the Shock lands, and of course Field of the Dead. Because we have so many different land options, we might as well get some zombies out of it, and a handful of basics on top of that. If you enjoyed this deck tech, you should check out some of my other ones right over here.